Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster recovery, crisis management, communications, well-being, emergency management, business continuity, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, plan, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. A couple of quick announcements. I will be speaking at the DRJ conference, October 11th to 14th, and I'm also going to be the MC for that conference. I will also be presenting at the BCI World Virtual Conference, November 3rd to 4th, and I will also be facilitating a panel discussion and 2 network discussions. Finally, the Continuity and Resilience Today conference, December 1st to 2nd, just down the road for me in Toronto. Fingers crossed, I can actually be there in person for that one. Now, today's show, a lot of you will know that I love to read. I almost always have 3 or 4 books on the go at any given time. And if you watched one of the recent shows I did with James Green, This Week in Business Continuity, we always share what kind of books we're reading. And he showed me one. And as soon as I saw it, I knew I have to get that book. And without even reading it, I knew I had to reach out to the author. And I did. And I'm very lucky to have the author of Indestructible, Reclaim Control and Respond with Confidence in Immediate Crisis. And I'd like to welcome to the show, Molly McPherson. Molly, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Alex. Just by preparing for the unexpected title, I am in the right place. That's what I'm all about.
That's great. And congratulations on the book, because I know it's not an old book. It's relatively new, right?
Yes, it came out this year. I worked on it throughout the pandemic. And so it is a book about crisis written during a crisis to help people manage a crisis. But I'm very proud about it. And I like the conversations that it creates, like the one we're having today.
Yeah, and I enjoyed it too. So thank you very much for that. There's some great information in here. I even, as I read through, I kind of recognized a few people that I've worked with over the years going, oh, I know who that could have been. Oh, I know someone who fit that role.
Are you going to tell me those people?
Oh, no, I don't think they're the actual people you wrote about.
I was going to say, I thought maybe we've crossed continents and you've worked in some federal disaster with me. No, but the archetype of a person, correct?
Yeah. The more that's like, oh, I know someone who fits that profile.
Yes.
Just in case anyone doesn't know who Molly McPherson is, could you take a minute or two and tell us about yourself, what you do, and how you got into what you do?
Oh my gosh, Alex. I'm like a lot of people who work in the business or who call themselves, a crisis management, expert, if you will. You just have a few crises under your belt and you develop a framework or a solution to solve the problem at hand. So my background, I'm originally from St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm a Midwest girl. I'm a Minnesotan. And I always grew up doing one of 2 things. I wanted to be a journalist or an FBI agent. And the 2 kind of go hand in hand as I love to uncover, problems, uncover, mysteries that are out there. And as I went through school, I ended up in graduate school in Boston at Boston University at their comm program, landed there at a time just as the internet was starting to take hold. And as a timestamp, there's 2 critical timestamps there. I was the first graduate class to have email, the very first class, and also there when the O.J. Simpson verdict was read. And as my career usually follows these iconic moments that happen in history, I always have an eye towards the response of it. So my experience, I worked on the media side, the press side. I worked in newsrooms, and I also worked in public relations, public affairs. I had a job down in Washington, D.C. I was the head of communication for the cruise line industry, the cruise lobby. And that was the time of 9/11, also when a Norwalk virus hit that entire industry. So I had my first hand at how to write a crisis plan for a virus when a virus, fells an entire industry. And then I also worked for FEMA in their external affairs office. And that time was in the period after Hurricane Katrina, when the agency was at its, just lowest ebb when it comes to reputation. And I learned a lot about the importance of reputation. So My career trajectory has always been very personal, that I always feel this need to somehow bring the internet and reputation together and decipher what caused it by both and how you can use both to solve it or
Oh,
to fix
well,
it. Mhm.
well, and that led to your book, and here you are today.
Yes, here I am today. Now working, on my own and loving it.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned St. Paul, Minnesota, where you're from. I'm going to mention a city to you where I grew up in that general area, Thunder Bay.
No kidding. First, I was going to say you were in the US. So Thunder Bay, also known as the lengths I would drive to get a beer when I was 18. That's my Thunder Bay story.
Thunder Bay, yeah, that's north of the border, 40 miles north of the border, I think it is. Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
yeah, that's where I grew up.
Know it well.
So that's, I went, oh wow, she's from my neck of the woods, roughly. So
Oh yeah, been there, sure.
so let's jump into your book. You
Yes.
right off the bat, you start telling us that things have changed for CEOs. In what way? How are things changed for CEOs? Because we always see the CEO, top floor, corner office, mahogany desk, they're nothing, they don't do anything wrong, so to speak. But things have changed for them.
Right. So, Alex, I mean, in your experience as well, it wasn't that long ago that the person in the front office, the head office, was a middle-aged white male. And they ascended to that position, due to skill, due to networking and the ability to be able to run and manage a business. And we look at the iconic CEO as, the person who was always shielded from any type of outside disruption. I mean, they literally had, usually a secretary, at a front desk that would, dissuade any interloper, any type of unwanted interruption from coming in.
Yeah.
And that also included the press. If there were stories, that door to the office not only meant this physical barrier, but there was also this barrier in the news cycle where CEOs for decades had the ability to manage their own issue because time was on their side, because deadlines were at the end of the day. They were late afternoon. They were early evening. So they had all day to decide and assemble a team of people together to decide, what are we going to do? What are we going to say? And at the very last minute, you might get a statement that comes out and they say what they want to say. What has changed dramatically for that CEO? Well, one, just from diversity, they're not always middle-aged white males now. We have a lot more diversity in gender, in background, in skill, in location, in race and sexual preference. We have this idea now that people who were once marginalized are now in positions of leadership. So we're kind of diluting the power that once, stood in that role, but also the influence of technology, the influence of social media, where people can now break down that door, figuratively, and go into the office and ask questions and also demand answers for them. So CEOs now are in the position where they are not only running businesses and they're not only trying to successfully keep their businesses afloat, they also have to be savvy communicators and understand what it takes to be considered a well-regarded CEO and a leader, and what it takes to satisfy the public's need for information. So it's definitely a balancing act that's happening there that CEOs need to accomplish.
It used to be when I first started in business continuity years ago, you had a couple of hours to get a message out. Now it's you have moments. Minute might be too long. You have moments,
Yes.
and I say that because I've been in fire drills, and maybe you've seen this too. You're in a fire drill, and there's people already going down the stairs, sending off messages to telling who knows who what's going on. So you're not even out of the building yet, and the message is getting out there.
Oh, without a doubt. And you mentioned, Alex, this idea of resiliency, what you and James were talking about, James Green were talking about, this idea of resiliency changes because what is the idea of resilient now? Resilient to what? So now the boundaries have changed. And as you mentioned, information, because it is so rapid now, people will already have communicated the message, disseminated the message, and set your reputation by the time you get down to the bottom of the building,
Mhm.
and it is so rapid. So you, on your whole way down to coming out of that disaster, that, fire, whatever it is, you're coming out of the fire, but you're walking right into another one. If you are not prepared to not only, handle it and have that information, but know the proper response to keep that crisis kind of contained in your place and to prevent it from spreading.
In a situation like that, see, we're already going off script here. If you are going down, 10 flights of stairs and people are already sending out a tweet or something on Facebook or whatever saying this is what's happening, what they think is happening, should organizations have something prepared, a general sort of a statement to send within moments of anything, rather than waiting for any sort of confirmation of a specific situation, but any kind of message that says, hey, we're experiencing a little something, bear with us, or something, just so that they know, oh, okay, I don't have to listen to Alex. He's just blabbering on about something. I should listen to Molly because Molly knows what's going on.
Well, I would never say that, Alex. You would listen to both of us naturally. But let's extend the metaphor that you created, which is an excellent one, which I may have to swipe now for the future. So let's say you do have a burning building and you're a firefighter. You're not walking into into a fire wearing t-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops. You're going to be prepared. You're going to have the equipment. You're going to have the proper uniform that you need to wear to not only put out that fire, but also to protect yourself. Every firefighter going in has that plan. And they know going into the building that many, many things can happen, and they can plan for the worst as they go down. But just like a fire spreading and going out of control, a viral fire can spread as well and go out of control. And you may not be able to contain it right away. It may jump to the next building. It may, cause more fires, from happening. But if you know what's happening and you still have the equipment and you're still prepared and you know what to do, the key is not necessarily putting it out right away, but you know how to contain it. You know how to prevent it from spreading and to manage it as you go. I'm a big believer in that a crisis impacting an organization's brand or reputation isn't necessarily doomsday for them. It's a challenge, but any crisis is going to cause risk, definitely. But if handled properly, it creates an opportunity to come out even stronger and even better if it's managed properly, because the public watches not just the beginning of the crisis, they're watching what's happening they're looking at that burning building, right? And they want to know what happens next. And if you come out and put out the fire and you're the hero, well, now your reputation isn't up in flames. Your reputation has been shined and buffed, and now people are impressed by what you're doing. So there's always an opportunity in a crisis.
Yeah, I was thinking and you just said it, the ancient Chinese proverb, right? Opportunity in crisis, or something along that lines.
Yeah.
I forgot the exact wording, but something along the lines. And I couldn't help but think of that. And I know before we started recording, you said sometimes there aren't any good examples of that. But I'm gonna ask you if you could even think of a good example where that might be the case, because I know you could rattle off lots of bad ones.
Yeah, well, yeah, there are so many bad ones. So are you saying like a good case of a response in a crisis?
Yeah, somebody that did respond right away, not necessarily the whole situation, but did turn around and get a handle on it immediately.
Well, here, some examples. I'm a very ripped from the headlines person. I am always, looking at the news that day, and I tend to forget the news that, had happened, behind us. And where I kind of trigger my memory is I always go to my Twitter feed to see, what I was talking about, but some current examples are out there. And you and I had mentioned this offline, that a lot of the good examples we don't hear about. And the reason why is because the crisis didn't come into the public ether. It didn't hit out. They made the right moves in the beginning to prevent the crisis from happening. So a lot of these crises, when they're big and when they are impacting, the reputation of the person or the brand or the leadership, usually there are a lot of missteps that brought them there. So that's why most of them, don't end so well. But if I had to look at two, one I'm going to pull off just from this week is I'm looking at Pope Francis. And, Pope Francis is a different type of Pope in many reasons, many ways, not just for his ideology, but I love his approach to media and to the press. And he now is getting a lot of heat from bishops and, questioning, how he is leading the Roman Catholic Church. I liked seeing him on a plane giving a press conference to all the reporters there, responding directly to accusations about him. And he's saying to the bishops, I want you to be a pastor, not a politician. That's an excellent example of taking a crisis, a bubbling crisis, and talk about an institution that is struggling under a crisis, the Catholic Church. And you have a leader who has deemed it important and understanding the power of the press and the media, and also using that technology to fly in the air, have a presser, and then to put that online, and to have the Vatican and their press staff put that out, and then to have the religious press, put that information out there. That's a great example. An ongoing example of a leader who I find has this indestructible brand that I'd like to see when it comes to leadership. Like people that I know, it's difficult to bring them down, is Rich McMillan. He's the CEO of Walmart. Walmart as a retailer, they had a lot of negativity when there was a lot of gun violence. Okay. And a lot of these big stores, big box stores are being called into question about their sales of handguns. He is a CEO who's decided to go onto social. He's an Instagram account. He's on Twitter, and he's very good about putting information out there. And he's a very mission-driven CEO who is not afraid to tell it like it is and to tell his kind of vision statement and mission statement, and how he can roll that out, socially and through the press. So those are two examples. Like when you go out and you attack it head on, those are the good examples to me.
You mentioned technology and the use of technology, and we're going to jump to that in our next segment, because I know you talk about a digital natural and a digital misfit. And
Yes.
I'll tell you where I am in that one in our second segment.
All right, can't wait. I think I know the answer.
We're talking with Molly McPherson, author of Indestructible, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Today we are talking with Molly McPherson, author of Indestructible. Molly, great first segment. At the end there, you talked about technology. In your book, you talk about digital natural and a digital misfit. What are those? What did you mean by those?
A digital natural is a common term that you'll see in a lot of places when they are describing a segment of the audience that feels very comfortable using technology. Shorthand, your digital naturals are people who grew up with technology almost literally in their hands. They went to school and they were given an iPad, or these are the kids to be quiet when they're traveling. They have iPhones and iPads with them. So it's anyone who really kind of went through those years, K through 12 years, with technology introduced to them. What this means is they have a comfort using technology. Compare that to a digital misfit. It doesn't mean that a digital misfit is old at all. It doesn't mean everyone older than millennial and above is a digital misfit, not necessarily. But this misfit category usually contains people who grew up at a time without technology. They went to school with chalkboards, and not whiteboards or smartboards, chalkboards, pencils, paper. They know how to use handwriting, they have penmanship. And technology was introduced at a much, younger, a much older age. Like for instance, for me, I'm Gen X. The first time I dealt with a computer was a floppy disk, in high school, and I was learning about it then. So Gen Xers, we kind of straddle that area. But the idea of the misfit, someone, a Gen Xer, a boomer, can certainly be digital naturals in the sense that they feel very, very comfortable using technology. But the idea of the misfit is they don't quite feel like they belong. And there's this level of of mistrust that's mixed with fear. It's this fear of not knowing how to use something, worrying that your reputation could sour by doing something, by doing something wrong. And you can be, a little bit of both. And so like Alex, like, I'm sitting here talking to you, you have, you're on YouTube, you're doing television, you're doing video, you're doing social media. You're not that misfit. And just because you had mentioned to me that you don't use Twitter as much, that doesn't make you a misfit to Twitter. It just means that you're using certain channels that you feel comfortable in because you've mastered them. And so where I hone in on in this chapter is identifying which one you are. And if you are a misfit, why are you there? And I want to eliminate as much as I can the fear about using technology, because honestly, you're using social media or digital technology, because not only can it help your life, it can certainly help you in a crisis.
Well, not having social media of any sort, if you're in a crisis, then to your point in the first segment, there's going to be a delay in getting your message out, right? And other people are going to start carrying your narrative, which could be incorrect.
Yeah, absolutely. Worse than the delay is that someone else is now going to be telling your story and disseminating it in their own way. And this is how misinformation happens. And also the cadence now of information, how it comes out, when someone is not open and transparent, or someone has not responded quickly enough, the assumption that is quickly made is that they're hiding. What are they covering? What are they hiding? So immediately someone is put into the column of mistrust. And now you're in a position that you have to earn it back and you haven't even said anything. So that's why we want to use technology, because of its rapid, rapid ability to get out that information. And even if you don't have all the information, use it to tell people we don't have the information. And as soon as we do, we're going to give it to you.
Well, how do you fight that public perception? Because obviously, the public can have one perception, even if you're saying the right things, can have one perception, and you're trying to get a different message out. So how do you bring those two together to turn that public perception around?
There's a great example, Alex, that's playing out right now in real time. So it's, September 22nd, and there's a case in the US right now. I'm sure you're familiar with it, Gabby Petito. So she's this, girl, this influencer, a van life blogger. Her and her boyfriend, fiance, were traveling out Wyoming, Utah. She ends up missing. Now he's missing. But last week, as this was starting to roll out, the part of the story that first triggered me was the parents, and how the parents, you had one set of parents sharing information and another set of parents who were refusing to put information out there. So right away, Brian Laundrie's parents, who refused to speak and refused to put any information out there, they were already cast as the villains. We knew that like right away, because they weren't speaking out, as opposed to Gabby's parents, who wanted this information. Now, this is a true crime case. It's not necessarily business reputation management, but it speaks to the psychology of it, that Brian Landry's parents will never get out of that box of being the villains or being a part of this case, which internet sleuths are now figuring out that they might be even deeper in it. And there's a reason why they weren't saying anything. But it's just in society right now, in the communication conversation that we have online, offline, if you are the person, the entity, the institution who refuses to speak out on about an issue, own up to an issue, or at least give a little bit of information, you are now going to be cast in a light, and in a very dark light. And it's going to be up to you to rehab and recover your reputation, as you go through a crisis. And that's not a position you want to be in.
How do you go about trying to change that perception, though?
It's a great question.
To your point, I'm already behind the 8 ball, so to speak. So do I put twice as many messages out? How do I try to change your opinion from that perception that you have? And I'm trying to get the real message out.
It's a good question, because I work with so many clients, directly. It's usually I work with the CEO, the president, the head, and their communication staff. And the disconnect that I seem to always notice there is in the leadership, there's a reluctance to put out information, because the biggest concern they always almost always have. I don't like to use absolute terminology, but it truly is almost always is the fear of information being taken out of context. In most cases, people aren't hiding things, right? There's just a reluctance to put the information out because they don't want it to spin out, and then they lose control of the narrative because it's been misinformation. I feel that it's my job. I try to help them feel more comfortable with the idea of just putting any information out there because you can control the context. It's all about control and chaos. Not saying anything creates chaos. If you put even a little bit of information out there and you're always updating it and you're letting stakeholders know that you're on it and you're updating it, you can't have that reputation spin out. You can't have the story go wildly out of context because all it needs is one statement, one press conference, one person to say, no, that's not true. Here's the truth. So that's how you regain control, is putting out all the information that you have when you have it, even if it's in drips and drabs, but you're still controlling your own narrative then. As soon as you let go, well, then they'll take off and running with it.
It's interesting. You didn't say respond to every single one of these different points of views. And would you recommend that? No, don't respond to all these different points of view. Stay on message.
Yeah.
Get the right information out.
Alex, that's the beauty of technology and social media. And that's what my book is about. And that's the secret sauce. So I'm all about, how do you create an indestructible brand? How do you create an indestructible response in a crisis? You can do that by using social media, by using technology. If you put a statement on Twitter, that is your statement. That is a cover all. That is going to get you everywhere. The press is on Twitter. Stakeholders are on Twitter. Everyone is on there. They're retweeting, they're quote tweeting. Your statement, that is good as gold once it's out there. And then how you add up on that, like you up level. Our next statement will come up at this time. You reach out to reporters online. You share video. You share statements directly from leadership. You keep dripping the information out there on your drip schedule. But as long as you're doing it, you contain it and you contain control of that crisis. When you lapse, or if there's some gap that gets longer and longer, that's when everyone's going to come in. And you can't respond to everyone because they're going to take it off on their own.
Yeah, that's true. And they do. But then eventually people stop listening to them because, to your point, you've stayed on message. You've continued that proper scheduled drip, so to speak, of information. And people say, okay, no, they really are getting the right information. And, Alex is a wackadoodle, ignore him, whatever he's saying.
No one would ever say that, Alex. Because I have video. Everyone sees you firsthand, so they know you're not a wackadoo.
Well, I don't know about that. Well, let's take that a couple of steps further now. You talk about the pillars of indestructibility. Now, I think you've got 7 of them, if I recall.
Yes.
But let's touch on a couple of them, because I don't want give everything away to everybody. I want them to go get your book to find out what some of the other ones are. But let's look at the first one, because I think the first one is one of the key ones: honesty. Yeah.
Well, yeah, honesty is key. If there was ever a foundational pillar, it's based in honesty. We are in an environment right now where you cannot lie. No one is, if someone lies, if someone puts out misinformation, it will be found out. Look again to that Gabby Petito case. Look to Governor Cuomo with the COVID deaths in nursing homes. You cannot keep information contained if people have an internet and a desire to find out that information. Yeah. So honesty is always going to be the best policy. And truly, like, people struggle with being honest because they don't want to they don't want to show the mess. They don't want to show the messy parts. They don't want to show where the gaps were, where the breakdowns were. But truly, that key, and this is why it's a pillar, if you use it and you use it right away, like in the first step of your response, if you own it right away and tell the truth, whatever it is, you are taking all of the power out of your opponents out there and all the challengers out there, because now they don't have anything to hit you over the head with. You've said it and you've been honest. So as soon as that information is out and you're honest, then you can immediately go into reputation repair. You can start rehabilitating your reputation. But the longer it takes for that truth to come out, you're just you're weakening the foundation for your crisis, and you're going to struggle coming out of it.
I guess that also goes to if you're only leaking a little bit of information, you're not being fully honest at the beginning. It kind of goes back to what you said earlier on. People will start creating their own narrative. So in a way, you're starting to create your own crisis even more, or a worse crisis.
Right. And you'd ask for an example. One that I found that was really good, and it's kind of an outlier one, was the star of a TV show, Arrow. So a lot of people, a lot of the people who are into the whole, now I'm going to say it, Marvel, DC. I don't even know, but I know it's important. Like, people know this brand, but Stephen Amell. So he was on a plane, and it went viral, where he had a fight with his wife, and it went all over social media. And of course, you have all these rabid fans who are sharing this information.
Yeah.
Well, it sat there for a while and stewed, and he likely got feedback from agents. He likely got feedback from producers saying, you have to fix this. You're never going to be hired again. Like actors, dime a dozen. He came out and did an interview, a very straightforward one, where he admitted 100%, not only that why he was wrong, he admitted that he was, I believe that he was, I don't want to say if it's wrong, but I think he said that he was drinking and it was a long flight. But he explained it almost painfully so on this podcast to explain what happened. And in the end, he said, I'm ashamed by what happened. And that, I thought, is a great example. He's showing what many people have done on flights, and we see this all the time, but I think it helped him tremendously. It was like an article that landed with impact, but that's precisely how you do it. You admit it. And if you're in a platform, in his case, like a podcast interview, where he can get into the details and explain it, people go, oh, there by the grace of God go I. I mean, I've done that, or I've seen other people do that. So I think that's a good example of how telling the truth, no matter how painful it is, can help you.
And that's just funny, because you just took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, it sounds like honesty can be painful. However, it seems to what you say could be the quickest way to get back to where you want to be.
Depending on the crisis, it could be the biggest Band-Aid of your life, or a tiny, tiny one that's just on the tip of your finger, but you have to rip it off, and don't be afraid of it. Just rip it off and then let the healing begin. It happens almost instantaneously, because as quickly as news happens, it goes away as well. So that's how you can very quickly bring a crisis to an end.
The next one I'd like to talk about, I'm going to jump down a little bit, is responsiveness.
Yes. Okay. So this idea of responsiveness talks about what is happening in real time. The responsiveness of it is how quickly are you putting that information out there. You can't put out information out quickly if you do not have social media channels. So this is the reason why I encourage my clients, and I encourage listeners on my podcast to embrace this idea of technology. Do you have to build up your resources? Do you have to hire more people? What do you need to do to have more than just one Facebook page? Why do you want to have Twitter? Well, a big reason to have Twitter is because if something does happen, that's where you're going to post your response. Because as I mentioned, that's where the press sits. They're on Twitter all day. So when you use a social network like a Twitter, you can get out there immediately. A good example of this is, there's ever an incident that happens with transportation, like on an airline, or a train, or any type of accident in real time. You're going to see it pop up on Twitter, and you're going to know precisely what's happening. You can put info and updates in that real time. You're not going to do that as much like in a Facebook, or like a TikTok or an Instagram, because the news feeds, and the AI behind it might not put this news in front of people, but the AI for Twitter and hashtags and how people use it tends to put like real news in real time. And that's where you want to be.
And the last one, before we take our second break, I think this is a key one. And I think a lot of people really don't fully understand this one. Accountability.
Accountability is the most important quality that you have to have in any crisis. And the absence of it not only extends your crisis, it makes it worse. So often it's the lack of it that will make it worse. Governor Cuomo, Kevin Spacey, any person, any leader, Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, Boeing, any of these like extended crises that are happening, usually there is a leader at the top or someone, Prince Andrew, who is refusing to accept accountability for anything. Now, in many, many cases, they're hindered just because of, legal privacy issues. Certainly those are going to come into proximity when there is a criminal case or some type of, legal issue there. But for many of these day-to-day ones or any of these incidents that happen, it's the lack of it, and the stunning lack of it is what causes these problems. The people who understand that they need to take accountability, and this idea is, to shorthand it, is own it. Like, I own it. This is mine. This happened on my watch. Even if it isn't directly like that CEO had their hand in it. If you're saying this happened on my watch and it isn't going to happen again, it's that accountability piece. If you have it, chances are you're going to get out of your crisis.
And I think that's a good spot to end. Actually, before we take a break, I want to make mention of some of the other pillars that you have here, but I want people to go to your book to read about them, because they all make sense. And you kind of touched on a couple of these as we went through anyway. Humility, genuineness, transparency, and relevance.
Yeah.
And they all make sense when you read through. The accountability one, I think, and honesty is, I think, are two key ones myself, because in the headlines we see right now, people who don't seem to want to be responsible for something or accountable to anybody or anything. And, those two, I think, for me, are key. They tell me a lot about a person, an organization, anything, right?
Yeah. And Alex, quickly, I'll say you touched on it. It tells you a little bit about a person. It tells you a little bit about a culture. These are all pillars, but they're also human qualities. They're
Yes.
human qualities that if you as a leader or as an organization, the position of your leadership, the culture of your business, if you can hit all of those in a response, that's how you're going to get through it, because you're showing those human qualities that are good human qualities to have, that people admire and respect, and they'll help you get through that crisis.
And that's the perfect spot to end our second segment. We're talking today with Molly McPherson, author of Indestructible, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Today we are talking with Molly McPherson, author of Indestructible, Reclaim Control and Respond with Confidence in a Media Crisis. Molly, lots of great information. Let's jump to some tips. 10 tips for keeping your brand and your reputation intact. And I just know that there's going to be a lot of managers and directors and VPs and CEOs listening to this. What's your list?
Okay, so on this list, in chapter 8 of the book, and of course, this is where you wish it was a digital book. That could always change, because there's so many tips. I could do 100 tips, just from what I find in firsthand experience. But the one that I put at the top of the list is speaks to the role of communicators. As I mentioned, I wrote this book during the pandemic. And as a communicator myself, I always felt like we were in the position of, back in college, where a communication degree was considered like one of those low end degrees, it didn't have a lot of strength to it. We were just like, oh, the AV major. But communication is so incredibly powerful to any business, because if you lack good communication skills, it can create a crisis, right? A crisis environment. And a loss of a reputation, there's a cost to that. It comes down to money. And if you communicate the business that you're in well, and you manage these crises, you are going to have a better business. And who does that for you are the communicators. I feel that communicators, especially during 2020, dealing with this pandemic, dealing with race issues, especially in the US, they are worth their money. And probably every communicator out there deserves a raise right now. So you don't want to dismiss them as a bunch of people that sit on phones all day and just and handle social media. They deserve a seat at the table, because they're the next ones in the next step of filling that vacuum. We had talked about in these two previous segments the risk and what happens when you do not speak up during a crisis. The people who are there to fill that vacuum is your communication staff. They are going to give you the counsel to help you. They're going to draft the statements. They're going to counsel you on telling you what's happening out there. They're doing social media monitoring. They're going to help fill that vacuum so you can control that crisis. And another tip is not overlooking key stakeholders. A key stakeholder that kind of came up from the back of the race up to the front, during the pandemic were internal stakeholders, your employees, because of social media, employees are driving reputation as well, for good and for bad. So you want to contain that narrative
Well, they can
that's
be
happening
some of
as
your,
well.
and they can be some of your best salespeople.
Oh, without a doubt.
I don't mean sales department. I just mean, as an employee, if you're doing all the right things, saying all the right things, they're saying the right things, they're feeling the right things, and they're promoting you for free.
Alex, I like that you said it was sales, because that's what it is. It's another form of sales and marketing. They are selling the reputation of your business. And if you have a strong reputation, then you're going to have a strong business.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right. So then some of the other tips that I talk about is it's really, it's about tapping into the culture that we're in right now. So it's like tapping into the authenticity of the leadership. And even in the pillars where I talked about these qualities, authenticity, this idea of genuineness, that sells in the environment that we're in. I think it's important to understand, even if you're in your business right now, your organization, the upper tier that you have at your organization. So maybe you have baby boomer, Gen Xer, maybe you have people still, from the greatest generation, maybe on your board, whatever it is. Don't be locked in this mindset of we still communicate how we communicated in 1990. 2021 has brought in a complete change of how people communicate. And sadly for us and people our age, we don't drive it anymore. It's Gen Z is driving communications now. What that means is information needs to be quick. It needs to be snackable. It needs to be easy to digest. People don't want to spend a lot of time trying to pull information from you. People don't have the focus and the patience like they used to dig. So what that speaks to is not only like proactive communications, like how you're putting your information out there, but how you react as well. So that's why you need to have the channels to do this. And that's why you want to have a YouTube channel for video. You want to have Facebook. You want to have Twitter. So all these other tips, kind of speak to that, do digital, always take a check, what is the sentiment of our brand out there? What do people think of us? And always have someone on staff, like monitoring what's happening. That's that key critical part of the communication piece, which is the listening skill. Who's listening online? Who has their ear to the pavement as it relates to social media and also, with people. And then the last one is to never, push back and defend via blaming or any type of blame shifting. Any finger being pointed that's away from you is not going to work in this environment. All that is when someone says they did it, all that finger does is it tells everybody to look at you because you're hiding something. Right? Like we know that. So that's like the top 10. It's just kind of a glance at where everyone is now and the expectation that audiences have from organizations, people, and brands out there.
A couple of things that you got me thinking of. You mentioned, you can have someone who monitors social media and what's going on. And I know there are applications out there. I've talked with a lieutenant from the police department in Burlington, Massachusetts, Lieutenant Mills. And he said that his police department actually uses applications to monitor what's happening around their area, using certain words to look for, to know that, oh, there's a school in Maine that just got closed down, or locked down because of something. And organizations, I'm assuming from some of the things that you said, that an organization should be able to do that themselves as well, to monitor their brand and their crises to make sure, hey, our message is not getting through.
Well, and not only, so I will, you mentioned law enforcement, right? You mentioned, Burlington, Massachusetts. So right outside of Boston, they're going to have all the technology that they need in a lot of police departments because of the Homeland Security funds after 9/11. They are well funded. But even police departments, like they now are looking at, they use technology all the time. They use, GPS, they use black boxes in cars, they use Ring video cams, to investigate crimes that are happening out there. But even law enforcement, and I got this direct from a longtime detective who's now a deputy police chief, who told me this piece about social media, even that is getting beyond them because there are so many internet sleuths out there. There's so many other people, digital natives, who are able to investigate things, online. So they kind of have to catch up with that as well. And that speaks to where we are. So whether it's, I mean, not whether you're dealing with a crime, you're investigating a homicide somewhere. I mean, not many of us are doing that. Obviously, that's very exclusive. But anyone in the business of doing business is to understand that your next crisis is likely going to be a digital crisis. And the way that you can manage that is by embracing this idea of we need to use social media. We need to use technology. And in order to do that, you need people to do that. So you need to give your communicators the resources they need. You need to give
Mhm.
risk management. You need to give any type of response team that you have, emergency management, whatever it is, they need the tools to be able to not only stay in the game, but to stay ahead of the game as well.
And one of the other things you mentioned that I liked when you talked about don't dismiss communicators or communications, that it's key. I always like to use the analogy of an arch, and communications is the keystone. So it doesn't matter what kind of plans and strategies and tactics you've built. As soon as you get to communications, if you don't do it right, it doesn't get put in right, you don't use it right, the whole thing comes crashing down.
I like that. Another good one. Yeah, I like that. That's true.
And the digital crisis, I think some of the things, and you touch on it in here too, is sometimes it's not necessarily a bad product that you did or a burning building crisis, but just something you said wrong.
Right. It's the micro crisis. And every business now, and that's what my business specializes in. I help organizations, associations, any business out there, helping them, plan for any type of a crisis, help them to respond for a crisis, and then help them clean up the crisis afterward and repair it, repair their reputation. And so often where it's happening is online. It's happening on social media. It's happening on Google search results, the negative stories that are out there. That's why you need to have the ability to be able to manage it and to contain it. And to be able to do that is you need to, embrace the idea behind it. And if you do, you're going to be able to successfully manage a crisis and successfully manage your business.
Yep. We only have a couple of minutes left. Would you like some final thoughts? Like a Jerry Springer type thing? Any final thoughts on crisis communications or management?
Jerry Springer. Oh my gosh, that's a throwback. I mean, now, Jerry Springer. I mean, don't I have to now reveal the paternity? Oh no, that's Maury Povich. Like someone completely different. Someone's got to throw a chair across the room, I guess, for Jerry Springer. Yeah. So final moment. Yeah. Like at the end, I have a podcast that Indestructible PR podcast. I've just changed the name of it. It was Confident Communications. But now it's because I'm just all in on this idea of indestructibility. And what at the end of every podcast that I do, every workshop that I give, every talk that I give, I always want to leave with an indestructible tip. What is that one leave behind that speaks to this idea of indestructibility? And for this talk, it's this, for our conversation today. I think your audience, in particular too, like knowing, just having us kind of worked in the same area, a lot of the people that still make up the segment when you get into emergency management, when you get into, resilience and any type of risk communications, it's still heavily male centric. It's still a mindset. You're going to be heavy with Gen Xers and baby boomers, so these are people who are in this kind of digital misfit world. They're people that, that look at it a little bit differently. is to try to eliminate the fear behind any of the channels that you can use, any of the technology you can use, and embrace it. That embracing this idea of transparency and putting that information out there and being confident to put it out on social media and be confident in your team, and they'll be able to do that. That is how you build an indestructible brand. That is how you prevent from being canceled in today's environment, is because people like people who speak up, who own it, who own any issue that's out there. They explain what that issue was and what happened, and then they make promises. Either it's not going to happen again, or these are the changes that we're going to make in the future. If you do those 3 steps, I call them an indestructible PR response, then you're not only going to survive the crisis, you're going to recover it, and you're going to come out even better.
Yep. And I think that's the perfect spot to end today's show. Molly, thank you very much. And congratulations on the book. It was a great read.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Great read. And like I said at the beginning, when I read some of the examples, I thought, I know someone who fits that.
Yeah.
You know?
We all do. I wrote a book about it. I know.
So congratulations on the book. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I hope a lot of people took a lot of good information back with them. And, with the pillars, I know we only touched on 3, but there's a lot of good information in those chapters. And I hope everyone picks up a copy and really pays attention to the information you provided us.
Thanks so much, Alex. I appreciate the time.
My pleasure. And to everybody watching and listening, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.